When the extreme heat wave hit, John Smith immediately brought Sarah Thompson back to her home and forced me to scavenge for supplies outdoors. That's when I found out John Smith and Sarah Thompson had been childhood sweethearts, had only been with me for my money. They forced me out into the scorching heat to search for supplies until I collapsed and died from heat stroke. But when I opened my eyes again, I'd gone back in time 1 week before the heat wave arrived. This time, I'd made sure they paid for what they did. As if it were on fire. Waves of heat rolled over me, threatening to evaporate the last drop of moisture in my body. I stumbled forward, the pavement searing my feet. Sweat dripped into my eyes, blurring my vision. Before I could even find shade, everything went black. Water. Water. I didn't know how much time had passed before my consciousness returned. My cracked lips barely formed the words, before the sound even left my mouth. A glass of water was pressed into my hand. A familiar voice spoke beside me. Cece, you're awake. You must be thirsty. Here, drink. Hearing that voice, I bolted upright in bed. When I saw John Smith's smiling face, my mind raced with confusion. Wasn't I just passing out from heat stroke while searching for supplies? Why am I at home? And since when does he offer me water? But I was too parched to care what game he was playing. I grabbed the glass and gulped it down. The cool liquid soothed my throat, easing the unbearable dryness. My eyes darted around the room, then landed on the date displayed on the TV. That's when I realized I'd gone back in time, 1 week before the heat wave, clenching my fists. I stared at my boyfriend's smiling face as memories from my past life flooded back. If not for what happened before, I'd never have guessed that the man who'd doted on me, who'd seemed so devoted, would turn into a monster the moment society collapsed. I was an only child. My parents died in an accident when I was in high school, leaving me their estate and company shares. I'd been alone until college, when John Smith came into my life and made me feel like I had a family again. John Smith, a so-called Phoenix man from a rural village, had lost his father young. His mother, Mrs. Smith, scraped by to put him through college. We met at a campus event, and he pursued me relentlessly, sweet-talking his way into my heart. We eventually got married. After the wedding, I worked at the company where my parents had held shares, while John stayed home as a house husband, playing the role of the perfect, caring partner. Just when I thought I'd found the man of my dreams, the heat wave hit. Society crumbled overnight, and so did his mask the moment the temperature soared. He brought Sarah Thompson into me home. They lived in me house, enjoyed my resources while forcing me to risk my life outside, scavenging under the brutal sun. If I dared complain, they'd beat me, taking out all their rage on me, while Sarah Thompson bathed in water more precious than gold. I was left licking my bleeding lips, crawling on the floor to drink her leftover bathwater. That's when I learned the truth. John had only ever wanted my money. Once he had it, he planned to ditch me for Sarah. In the end, they sent me out to die in the heat, but fate had other plans. Now that I was back, I wanted nothing more than to strangle John Smith with my bare hands. But this was still a society with laws. Killing him would land me in prison. So I swallowed my rage. They won't last long anyway. Last time, I'd used my connections to stockpile food and water at insane prices, keeping them comfortable while I suffered. This time, things would be different. After finishing the water, I dressed and left, claiming I had work. John clung to my hand, pouting as he handed me a breakfast he'd prepared, urging me to eat on the way. To avoid suspicion, I faked a smile, then tossed the food in the trash the second I left the neighborhood. Heart-shaped pancakes, more like death-shaped. Ever since we married, John had made me breakfast every day, arranging everything into cutesy hearts. At first, I'd been touched, but during the heat wave, I overheard him and Sarah laughing about it. Had been dosing my food with slow-release poison. Undetectable, untraceable, just a matter of time before I'd drop dead naturally, leaving him free to take my money and run off with her. From home, I drove straight to the office and sold my shares in TechCorp to a business partner for $10 million. Then I headed to a villa halfway up the mountainside, a property my parents had bought before they died, who had barely moved in when the accident happened. Afterward, I couldn't bear to stay, so I bought another place. But now, this villa was my lifeline, far from the city, with low population density and naturally cooler temperatures. It was the perfect shelter. The 3-story house had a yard, though I hadn't lived there in years. I hired cleaners to maintain it monthly. So it was movie-in ready, but ordinary walls wouldn't hold back the coming heat. I hired contractors to reinforce the structure, adding insulation and heat-resistant coatings. Every window was replaced with explosion-proof thermal glass, and in any disaster, the real danger isn't nature, it's people. Last time, society collapsed within days. People killed each other over scraps. Rumors spread of men drinking their wives' blood to survive. I wasn't taking chances. I stocked up on weapons, installed blast-proof doors, and reinforced the perimeter walls, topping them with broken glass, with the power grid doomed to fail. I bought solar panels, generators, and enough fuel to last. By the time I got home that night, it was past 7 as I stepped inside. Mrs. Smith, John's mother, glared at me from the couch, a handful of sunflower seeds in her wrinkled grip. "Where the hell have you been?" she snapped. "A woman's place is at home, serving her man, not gallivanting around while he cooks for you." She'd always treated her son like some god among men. The fact that had settled for me was, in her eyes, a divine mercy. Never mind that they lived in me house, ate me food, and spent my money. To her, I should have been groveling at their feet. If I worked, shameless. If John lifted a finger at home, my failure as a wife. What she didn't know was that had begged to be the stay-at-home spouse. What she didn't know was that her exceptional son was just another medicine grad, had never afford a home here without me. Looking at her smug face, I wanted to slap her into next week. She'd known about John and Sarah's plan. She'd encouraged it during the heat wave. She was the first to deny me water, the first to demand I be sent out to die. She ranted. John walked in with dinner, playing the hero as always. "Mom, stop," he chided. "I goes to handle the housework. If you keep harassing Cece, they'll ship you back to the countryside." On the surface, he was my knight in shining armor. In reality, this was their script. Mrs. Smith played the villain, John played the devoted husband, all to make me trust him more, to hand over my wealth faster. Last time, I fell for it. I endured her abuse, believing John was on my side, until the heatwave stripped away his act. Now, I knew better. If Head defended me, Head have sent her packing after the first insult, but it wasn't time to expose them yet. So I bit my tongue. Just like before, the next morning, I hit the appliance store for 6 industrial freezers. Then I called a wholesaler and ordered everything I'd need: bottled water, instant meals, MREs, canned goods, jerky, freeze-dried veggies, fruit, anything non-perishable. To keep my stockpile hidden, I rented a storage unit far from the villa. Once the deliveries arrived, I'd move everything myself after the renovations were finished. After finishing all that, I drove to the wholesale grocery market. There, I bought 20 bags each of rice and flour, along with a ton of seasonings. That'd be enough to last me a long time. Once I hauled the rice and flour back to my rental place, I headed to the supermarket to stock up on daily essentials: towels, toilet paper, pads, toothbrushes, toothpaste, you name it. I grabbed a bunch, whether I needed it or not. Whatever. I've got the money, finally. I hit up a few pharmacies and bought a massive haul of meds, dozens of cases of electrolyte drinks and cooling patches alone. I made trip after trip in the rented van, hauling all the supplies and meds back to my place. The heat wave hadn't officially hit yet, but the city was already baking at 104°F, a good 18°F hotter than usual for this time of year. It felt like we'd been tossed into a giant steamer. Just standing there had everyone drenched in sweat. After unloading everything, I chugged an ice-cold drink from the fridge and stood under the AC for a while. Once I cooled down a bit, I flopped onto the bed and scrolled through the news. Plenty of people online were already complaining about the unbearable heat. I took the chance to warn them this wasn't normal. They should stock up just in case. But before long, some know-it-all chimed in, saying it was just a dry heat wave. Once it passed, temperatures would go back to normal. They backed it up with all kinds of facts and figures, making my warning sound like fear-mongering. The next thing I knew, I got banned, and my post got deleted. All I could do was shake my head. I get it. Skepticism's normal. If I hadn't been reborn into this nightmare, knowing what was coming, I wouldn't have believed it either. The next 4 days were a blur, either out shopping for supplies or overseeing renovations at the villa. The solar panels were installed in just 2 days. The workers showed me how to maintain them and gave me some usage tips. The actual house renovations were slower, way more labor-intensive, but I threw money at the problem, hiring extra crews to work around the clock, somehow. They finished 2 weeks' worth of work in 4 days. I paid them in full, even tossing in a $150 bonus for each worker. When they mentioned heading back to their hometowns for harvest season, I warned them about the weird heat and told them to stock up on water and supplies. They left happy, calling me the nicest client they'd ever had. No deductions, just bonuses. After thanking me a bunch, they hauled their bags to the train station. I watched them go inside, hope they survive what's coming. Right as the renovations wrapped up, the freezers I'd ordered earlier arrived. Once they were installed, I spent 2 days shuttling supplies from the rental to the villa in the van. Then I hit up a butcher and bought enough meat to fill all 6 freezers. After that, I set up covert cameras and motion sensors around the property. Only when everything was done did I finally drive back to my old place. Between shopping and supervising, I'd been out all day, every day. Mrs. Smith, who already had it out for me, saw her chance the second I walked in. Out all hours. Who knows what kind of man you're running around with? I almost laughed. The heat wave was hitting tomorrow, and I'd been trying to figure out how to leave. Now Shed handed me the perfect excuse. You and your son live off me. Even if I were seeing someone, hell, even if I were bankrolling some guy, what's it to you? Meanwhile, you're in me house, talking trash. Some gratitude. She turned red with rage. John stormed out of the kitchen, glaring. Apologize to my mother. I nearly snorted. Typical, when Shebaratism. He's never in a hurry to step in, but the second I clap back, he's all over it, and no way was I apologizing. You wanted this fight, when I didn't budge. Mrs. Smith threw herself on the floor, wailing about her tragic life, widowed young, her grown son letting her be disrespected. John grabbed my arm, squeezing hard, demanding I apologize. My skin burned under his grip, so I slapped him. The satisfaction of hitting that smug face was unreal, but I couldn't push him too far, not yet. If he snapped, it'd be the one paying for it. So I forced out some tears and sobbed. She started it, and now you're hurting me. I want a divorce. That shut him up. John's only with me for my money. No way he'd risk losing it now. He immediately let go, switching to sweet talking and apologies. I wasn't having it. I shoved him away, grabbed a chair, and smashed the AC. Everything in this house is mine, and this is how you treat me. Crocodile tears aside, I was thrilled. With the heat wave coming, I wasn't leaving them a damn thing. John froze, whether from shock or fear. I'd leave. I didn't care. Mrs. Smith just whimpered about wasting good appliances. Waste. It paid for it. I'll break whatever I want. Better than leaving it for you to enjoy when hell breaks loose tomorrow. I went wild, trashing everything, even dumping the fridge's contents and all the dry goods into the trash. By the time I was done, the room was a wreck. John kept trying to smooth things over, but I cut him off. I'm staying at a hotel. You two clean this up. When it's done, maybe I'll come back. Then I drove straight to the villa. The second I walked in, I cranked the AC and let the cold air blast over me. I poured an iced Coke and pulled up the hidden camera feed. I deinstalled those cameras while John and his mom were out. No way was I leaving them unwatched. On screen, they were picking through the wreckage. Mrs. Smith whined about the destroyed appliances while bad-mouthing me. John, though, he just muttered, "Just wait. Shall get what's coming." Then, he made a call. At first, I thought it was to beg me to return, but then, knocking, Sarah, his side piece, walked in. Perfect. Now the whole gang's here. Mrs. Smith, weirdly cheerful, went out to buy barbecue after Sarah mentioned craving it. The second she left, John and Sarah went at it. Pathetic. 5 seconds tops, then the plotting started. That crazy bitch threatened divorce today. John grumbled. Sarah, still naked, purred. If she does it now, all our work's wasted. Why not just arrange an accident? John's eyes darkened. Tomorrow, I'll tamper with her brakes. She won't make it back. Watching from the villa. I almost laughed. How had I ever been dumb enough to trust these snakes? But no matter. After tonight, they get exactly what they deserved. I checked the time, almost 10 p.m. Temperatures would plummet soon. But that was just the calm before the storm. Tomorrow at sunrise, the real heat would hit. In just 30 minutes. It hit 122 and keep climbing since the villa stayed cooler. I curled up under an AC blanket and slept. I woke up drenched in sweat outside. The thermometer was already at 122 and rising. This was only the beginning, even with all my prep. The villa's indoor temp was still over 86 I blasted the AC, chugged another Coke, and finally cooled off. Now, time to watch the show. I picked up my phone, and dozens of heatwave alerts from FEMA popped up on the screen. Next came announcements about work and production shutdowns, urging residents to stay indoors and avoid going outside to prevent heat stroke. A 122-degree, 50°C heat wave was just the beginning of the disaster. But online, it had already sparked a massive uproar. Most people were complaining about the unbearable heat, even with the AC blasting. Their bodies were sticking to their bamboo mats, but what they didn't know was that the temperature would only keep rising. It wasn't until the water and power went out that they'd realize what true terror felt like while preparing breakfast. I pulled up the surveillance feed from John Smith's place. The footage quickly showed the three of them, since ID smashed their AC yesterday. They dug up a small fan from somewhere and were huddled around it, taking turns to catch whatever breeze it could muster. But outside, the heat was so intense that even the fan's air felt like a furnace blast. The tiny fan barely made a difference, even while sitting completely still. Beads of sweat the size of peas kept rolling down their bodies, soaking their clothes in no time. That bitch ruined our AC yesterday. If it weren't for her, we wouldn't be suffering like this, John Smith cursed. But as the indoor temperature climbed, he didn't even have the energy to keep insulting me. John, we should call someone to install a new AC. Sarah Thompson whined. John immediately dialed an AC repairman, demanding he come over right away. But before he could even finish his sentence, the guy on the other end snapped. It's 122 degrees outside, and FEMA's ordered a work stoppage, and you want me to come install an AC? You think my life's worthless? I'll pay extra. Keep your money for your funeral. The call ended with a sharp click. At 122 degrees. No amount of money was worth risking your life, John. Stubborn as ever. Tried a few more repairmen, same result. What do we do now, John? We're gonna die without AC. Sarah clung to his arm, batting her eyelashes like some lovesick fool. After a long pause, John's face lit up. A hotel. Well, go to a hotel. Oh, my brilliant boy. Hotels have AC, it won't be this bad there. Mrs. Smith, who'd been nearly delirious from the heat, suddenly perked up at the suggestion, but before she could celebrate, John cut in. Mom, you're old. Hotels cost money. Just stay here with the fan. Mrs. Smith stared at her beloved son in disbelief. What she didn't know was that John was a born selfish bastard, even though I gave him a 1,000 monthly allowance. Had never once bought her so much as a shirt. No way had waste money on a hotel for her now. Before Mrs. Smith could process the betrayal, John was already dragging Sarah out the door without a second glance. Going to a hotel. Too late. I watched their retreating figures on the monitor and smirked. Every hotel in the city had been fully booked an hour ago. By the time they got there, they'd be turned away empty-handed, just as I predicted. It wasn't long before John and Sarah came stumbling back, drenched in sweat, each carrying a new fan. I almost laughed. They'd thought to buy fans but not food. Fine. Let them starve. Meanwhile, I lounged in my air-conditioned room, savoring homemade Italian ice. One bite sent a wave of icy relief through me. Pure bliss. At first, some people were been happy about not having to work, but as the temperature climbed toward 140 F, 60 C, more and more were hospitalized for heat stroke or heat exhaustion. Finally, someone on the neighborhood forum sounded the alarm, urging everyone to stock up on supplies, but most dismissed it, convinced the heat wave would pass in a day or two. Only a handful were willing to risk heat stroke to prepare. In my past life, I'd seen that post and taken it seriously, using my connections to stockpile a truckload of supplies, and who benefited? Those 3 leeches, now. On the monitor. Mrs. Smith was reading the same warning on the forum. She started to ask John to go buy food. But he cut her off. It's a death trap out there. If anyone's going, it's not me. He shoved yesterday's leftover barbecue into his mouth, then immediately spat it out. Overnight. The heat had turned it rancid, starving but too lazy to move. John turned to Mrs. Smith, still clutching her fan. Mom, make me something to eat. Son, you do it. I can't take this heat. Mrs. Smith was struggling, her face flushed red, her body barely holding up, but before she could finish, John kicked her hard. If it weren't for me, you'd still be rotting in that backwater village. Now get to work. Extreme heat makes people volatile, but I in my past life. Even with AC, John would beat me at the slightest provocation now. With no relief from the heat. His temper was even worse when Mrs. Smith didn't obey. He unleashed his rage on her. Are you deaf? He kicked her repeatedly until she collapsed, howling in pain, but her cries only pissed him off more. He yanked the fan from her hands and snarled. Stop wasting time. Go cook, or I'll beat you to death. Defeated. Mrs. Smith dragged herself up and shuffled to the kitchen, risking heat stroke to make him a meal. Watching this, I couldn't help but smiled. I in my past life. Mrs. Smith had tormented me, egging John on while sneering. A woman should obey her husband, and if he's dead, her son. Now, she'd get a taste of her own medicine. I'd thrown out most of the food before leaving, so their supplies wouldn't last long. As I enjoyed a steak with red wine, I kept an eye on the screen outside. The temperature neared 140 F, 60 C. But my reinforced villa stayed a perfect 72 F, 22 C. Thanks to the AC, pleasantly cool. I even had seconds for dinner, day 2 of the heat wave. I stayed up binge-watching dramas and didn't wake up until noon, before I could even rub the sleep from my eyes. A massive explosion rocked the air, grabbing my binoculars. I spotted a car that had spontaneousone combusted. Luckily, it was parked roadside, no casualties, but by now, people were used to cars bursting into flames. No one even bothered to look. Scrolling through my phone, every app was flooded with videos, forest fires, overcrowded hospitals, heatstroke victims. My indoor thermometer read 82 F, 28 C. But outside, it was a blistering 145 F, 63 C, and still climbing, despite the hellish heat. Most people were just whining online, thrilled about not having to work. Some even joked, hope it gets hotter tomorrow, more vacation time. They were all convinced FEMA would just fix it with artificial rain. What they didn't know, artificial rain needs specific conditions. Right now, the air was so dry it felt like breathing fire. No way to make it rain, since I slept in. I was starving by the time I got dressed. I whipped up some spicy shrimp and pulled up Mrs. Smith's surveillance feed while eating. John and Sarah were camped in front of 3 fans while Mrs. Smith lay on the floor, desperate for relief. If she edged too close to the fans, John kicked her away. Their lunch, a pitiful bowl of rice, probably scavenged from the trash after I'd thrown it out, too lazy to brave the heat for groceries. They were eating garbage. Day 3 of the heat wave. The city's power grid collapsed from overuse, but the internet still worked. Suddenly, the same people who'd been joking yesterday were panicking. No matter what they tried, the heat was unstoppable. Sweat poured off them like rain. In freezing weather, you could bundle up, but against extreme heat, few options. I'd known the blackout was coming, so I'd installed covert cameras with independent power sources. Even without electricity, they'd keep running for a month. I checked the feed, with no power. John, Sarah, and Mrs. Smith were dousing themselves in water and lying on the floor, trying to cool down. I wonder if that bitch is dead from the heat yet. If she is, her money's ours, John muttered. If she's alive, she better come back. We're out of food, she can go get more. A moment later, my phone rang. John, when I answered, His face flickered with disappointment, then a fake smile. Cece, where are you? Are you okay? It's so hot out, I'd hate for you to get heat stroke. I'd be heartbroken. I almost laughed. 3 days into the heat wave. And no calls. If he cared, he wouldn't have waited this long. John. I'm at a hotel. I'm fine. But this heat is insane. Good. I was so worried. He faked relief, then pivoted. Hey. You should come home. We're out of food. And you know Mom's health, she can't go hungry for long. Sure, John. Because you care so much about Mom. I smirked and took another bite of shrimp. Let them sweat. This was just the beginning. When I heard John Smith's words, I couldn't help but laugh inside. Your mom, not mine. Whether she can take it or not is none of my damn business. Besides, if you know your mom can't handle it, why don't you hurry up and find her some food instead of waiting for me to come back and do all the work? Dream on. In my head, I cursed out John Smith and his entire family 1,000 times, but on the surface, I pretended to feel bad for Mrs. Smith. That I told John Smith it was way too hot outside right now and that I'd come back once it cooled down in the evening. Then I hung up. On the surveillance feed, John Smith, after hearing I'd return, started talking with Mrs. Smith about how stupid I was for falling for their lies so easily. At the same time, they were already planning how to force me to scavenge for supplies once I got back. He took a few sips from a water bottle, then poured the rest over himself. In this brutal 60-degree heat, 140 F. The human body sweats like crazy. John Smith and Sarah Thompson weren't just drinking water constantly, they were dumping it on themselves to cool down. Their water consumption was insane, but the water supply had been cut since the power went out. The drinking water they had stored at home wasn't much. Looking at the empty bottles on the floor, I knew they wouldn't last long, and yet, they still didn't conserve. To cool off, they kept dumping entire bottles over themselves. Do they think I'm going back? I muttered, watching John Smith's antics on the screen. By noon, the temperature outside kept climbing, hitting nearly 65 degrees, 149 F. At that heat, a person wouldn't last 30 minutes exposed. Online, people were sharing their life hacks for staying cool, some hid in bathtubs, others curled up inside freezers. Any spot with even a hint of coolness was fair game. The evaporation rate in this heat was insane. Leave a bottle of water indoors, and half of it would be gone in 2 hours, only half a day into the blackout. And already someone in the neighborhood group chat was begging for water, saying they were dying of thirst and offering to pay top dollar. But by now, everyone understood how bad things were. No one knew how long this heat wave would last. So when that guy pleaded in the chat, nobody responded. Finally, after a long silence, someone mentioned there might be water in the security booth. The guy braved the heat to get there and found half a crate of water, but before he could haul it back, 2 others showed up, knocked him out, and stole it. Someone filmed the whole thing and posted it in the neighborhood forum. The group chat went dead silent after watching the video. Deep down, everyone knew, when survival's on the line, people will do anything. The incident was quickly brushed aside, deliberately forgotten. Once the sun set, the temperature dropped to 60 degrees, 140 F. Still unbearably hot, but at least better than daytime. Realizing how dire things were, some people seized the chance to scavenge for supplies. The early birds hit up stores and supermarkets, scoring plenty, but those who went later weren't so lucky. Faced with empty shelves, they turned on each other. At first, it was just ambushes in dark corners, then it became outright robbery. People were stabbing each other over a bottle of soda or half-empty water. I watched the videos on my phone, completely unsurprised, and this was just the beginning. The longer this went on, the more ruthless people would get. After dinner, my phone rang again, seeing the familiar number. I leisurely answered while pulling up the surveillance feed. The 3 of them were still sprawled on the floor, surrounded by empty water bottles. Cece, when are you coming back? It's not safe out there. Just hurry home, I got us enough supplies to last ages. John Smith was trying to bait me back with promises of stockpiled goods. To make it convincing, he even dug up some photos of stacked water and food, did a quick Photoshop job, and sent them to me. What he didn't know, I was watching his every move through the cameras. I saw Mrs. Smith digging rotten fruit out of the trash and shoving it into her mouth. John. My car caught fire from the heat. I can't drive back, why don't you come get me? With the relentless heat. Plenty of cars had spontaneously combusted. John knew my car was brand new, without even heat-resistant tint. So he didn't question it, but the moment he realized I couldn't return, his tone flipped, yelling at me for running off and now being stuck outside. Then, seconds later, he switched back to fake concern, urging me to find a way home because it's dangerous out there. Dangerous out there. And it's safe with you, I scoffed. Last time I stayed with them, and they still forced me out to scavenge until I got roasted alive. Not happening again. While John Smith and the other two lay starving and overheating on the floor, I was chilling in front of the AC, living my best life. Ice cold Coke. Check. Chilled watermelon. Check. Pure bliss. Sometime later, on the feed, John Smith looked around desperately for water but found nothing but empty bottles. Where's the water? There was a bottle here. Did you hide it? He glared at Mrs. Smith and Sarah Thompson. You said that idiot woman would bring us supplies. I used the last bottle, Mrs. Smith snapped. When the hell did I say that? And why's a useless old hag like you wasting water? Already boiling with heat and thirst. John Smith lost it. He grabbed Mrs. Smith and started beating her, unleashing days of pent-up rage. And no matter how much she begged, he didn't stop until he was exhausted. Then he ordered her to go outside and find water. I'm your mother. You're sending me out in this heat to die. Mrs. Smith tried the guilt trip, but she overestimated her son's conscience before she could finish. John cut her off. You drank the last bottle. And what? You want me to die of thirst? He shoved her out the door, just like Shed done to me in the past. Then he warned her, don't come back without water or food. If you do, I'll beat you to death. Under his threats, Mrs. Smith trudged out into the blistering heat. I shut off the monitor and slept. The next morning, the first thing I saw on the feed was Mrs. Smith flushed red in bed, with half a bottle of water on the table. Damn, the old hag found supplies. I checked the playback at 5 a.m. Shed returned with 3 bottles of water and 2 loaves of bread, but before she could even step inside, John and Sarah pounced like wild animals. They snatched everything from her and wolfed it down, leaving nothing. Exhausted from the night, Mrs. Smith reached for water, only for her son to kick her away. You're old. Wasting water on you is pointless. Mrs. Smith collapsed onto the bed, but John ignored her. After eating, he immediately dragged Sarah into a 5-second game. As the sun rose, the temperature outside hit 70 degrees, 158 F. Just standing indoors was enough to make you sweat buckets, let alone whatever game those two were playing. Soon, Sarah, drenched in sweat, started whining for water. John didn't want to share his remaining half bottle, so he kicked Mrs. Smith out again. Not long after, someone posted a photo in the neighborhood group. Some old lady tried scavenging at noon, didn't even make it out of the complex before she dropped dead from the heat. I opened the image. It was Mrs. Smith. I recognized that face even if she were ashes. I wonder how she felt, dying by her own son's hand. John saw the post about his mom but didn't react, like her death meant nothing. But soon, my phone rang. He needed a new pack mule to fetch supplies, and I was his first pick. I ignored him, switching to airplane mode. By the next afternoon, the surveillance showed John and Sarah barely moving, lips cracked from thirst. I screenshot the feed and sent it to them. You bitch. You're spying on me. Bring supplies and get back here now, or I'll kill you. Kill me. You don't have the strength. Outside, it was 70 degrees, 158 F. Skin exposed to sunlight burned instantly. Walking barefoot on the road would scorch your feet through shoes. A raw egg would fry in under 30 seconds. Even those heat-resistant premium ice creams melted in a minute. Last time, John forced me out in this hellscape until I baked to death, but now, he couldn't even step outside himself. Since yesterday, he hadn't had a single drop of water. Between the heat and dehydration, he could barely stand. When I didn't respond, his threats turned to begging. Then blame shifting, everything was Sarah's fault. So I told both of them. There's water hidden at home, but I'll only tell one of you. Whoever's left standing gets it. John understood immediately, before Sarah could react. He lunged for her throat. She clawed at him in disbelief, never imagining he'd kill her over a bottle of water, but she forgot. A man had sent his mother to her death would do anything. As John squeezed tighter. Sarah's face twisted in agony. She fought until her body went limp, then. Nothing. John Smith saw what was happening. Tossed Sarah Thompson's corpse aside. And called me, demanding to know where the water was. There is no water. I lied. A scumbag like John Smith. I'd kill him with my own hands if I could. No way I was giving him water. When John Smith realized I'd tricked him, that there was no water at all, he flew into a rage. He smashed his phone on the ground, then turned his attention to Sarah Thompson's body beside him. He licked his lips, then, in a flash, he grabbed a kitchen knife, slit Sarah Thompson's throat without hesitation, and started frantically sucking the blood from her arm. He didn't stop until her blood had completely clotted. Back in my past life, I'd heard rumors online about desperate people drinking their spouse's blood, but I'd never seen it firsthand. Now, watching John Smith's frenzy, even through a screen, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. This guy's a monster. I need to take him out, fast. As I watched the surveillance feed, my mind raced, trying to figure out how to eliminate John Smith as quickly as possible, but before I could come up with a plan, the covert cameras were destroyed. Whatever was happening over there, I could no longer see. Crap. What if John Smith comes for me? A sense of dread settled in. Without the cameras, I had no idea if he was alive or dead. If he tracked me down, I'd be in danger. I racked my brain, digging through memories from my past life for anything useful. Then, two blurry figures surfaced in my mind. A plan snapped into place. In my past life, two serial killers in the neighborhood specialized in stealing supplies. Now, I'd use them to get rid of John Smith. Once the plan was set, I deliberately posted the photos John Smith had sent me, back when he'd tried luring me back, into the neighborhood group chat. Then I spammed the chat, making it look like an accidental sin that I was desperately trying to cover up. It didn't take long for people to notice. They scrolled up, saw the photos, and immediately started begging. This house in Building 13 has so many supplies. Can you spare some? I haven't had water in half a day. They'll pay 20 grand for 2 bottles of water, please. Sell me some. The heat wave had hit hard, cutting off water and power without warning. Most people hadn't stockpiled enough, especially drinking water. So when they saw the supplies in the photos, they clung to the hope, pleading with me to share. But after posting, I went completely silent. That only convinced them I had a massive stash. The requests turned desperate, then threatening. If we're gonna die of thirst anyway, we might as well take what we need. Perfect. My goal was achieved. Whether those 2 killers would take care of John Smith was another question. After seeing what he did to Sarah Thompson, drinking her blood like some animal, I wasn't taking any chances. If John Smith survived, remember I lived here. I tried reassuring myself, no way would he come in this heat, but the fear lingered. So, under cover of night, I started setting traps in the yard. Stepping outside was like walking into an oven. The 60-degree heat scorched my skin instantly. My vision blurred, and I nearly passed out. I chugged electrolyte drinks, slapped cooling patches on my body, and doused myself in ice water just to keep working. It took all night, but I dug the traps, lined them with sharpened metal spikes, and covered them with makeshift camouflage. Then, I activated the motion sensors. If anyone came near, an alarm would warn me. 3:10 days passed. Then, on the 4th night, 3 figures crept through the darkness. The cameras caught a familiar face, John Smith. The other 2, the serial killers from the neighborhood. In my past life, these 2 murdered for fun. They'd torture survivors, drawing out their deaths in the worst ways possible. Falling into their hands was worse than dying. Wait, wasn't I trying to use them to kill John Smith? Why are they working together now? Before I could process it, John Smith's voice crackled through the feed. Dragon. This is my place. All the supplies from the photos are inside. Get in. And they're yours. Food, water, even the woman. You serious? The leader, a hulking guy, Grinned, would I lie to you? Dragon. I let out a dry laugh, talk about backfiring. ID tried using the killers as bait, only for John Smith to lead them straight to me, while I was still reeling. They gave up on the front gate and headed for the wall. ID reinforced it. Even lined the top with broken glass. But 3 determined men could still climb at point. One of Dragon's lackeys wrapped his hands in cloth. Scaled the wall with their help. Cleared the glass. Then pulled the other 2 up. In 60-degree heat. Even simple exertion was dangerous. They poured water over their heads. Panting. Before finally dropping into the yard. A thud, then a scream. ID dug multiple traps. Each filled with sharpened spikes I didn't know who'd fallen in. But if those spikes hit, they weren't getting out alive. Moonlight revealed 1 man already unconscious in the pit, the other 2 didn't retreat. Instead, they pulled out an axe. Testing the ground ahead before moving forward. As they inched closer, my pulse spiked. Sure, the blast-proof door would hold. But letting them linger was asking for trouble. I eyed my weapons, a Tonto sword. A crossbow, but in a real fight. Useless, then. My gaze landed on the diesel generator. ID bought gasoline with it, 2 whole cans, which burns faster. Gas or diesel, doesn't matter. Use both, while I debated. The men reached the first-floor window and started hacking at the glass with the axe, but this was bulletproof. After several strikes, the axe was dented, the glass untouched, seizing the moment. I poured the fuel mixture over them from above. Boss, that's gasoline. The lackey shouted. I didn't give them time to react. I lit a rag, tossed it down, and whoosh, they screamed, rolling, flailing, stumbling right into another trap. The spikes impaled them. The fire kept burning until nothing was left but charred corpses. By morning, the heat was unbearable, but I forced myself outside. 2 blackened bodies. And in the last trap, John Smith, barely alive, his legs skewered on the spikes. Blood pooled around him. Even after all that, he was still breathing. This guy just won't die. When he saw me, he begged, please. Help me. We were married once. You can't just leave me. I laughed coldly. Help you? After everything? When Sarah Thompson wasted the water ID paid a fortune for, on a bath, while I went thirsty. When they hoarded food, refusing me even a bite. When they beat me and forced me back into the scorching hell outside. Where was we were married once then? I didn't kill him. Filth like that wasn't worth dirtying my hands, but in my past life. ID died under the burning sun. Now, let him suffer the same way. I walked back inside, leaving him to the 60-degree heat. Within an hour, he was gone. I stared at his lifeless body and suddenly started crying. Revenge was mine, but I didn't feel victorious. Only memories of my parents, long gone, flooded my mind. That night, I dragged all 3 bodies out and finally let myself rest. The heatwave lasted 9 months. Then, in March, the sky darkened, thunder rolled, rain poured. I ran outside, letting it wash over me. Temperatures plummeted. FEMA moved in. Society slowly rebuilt. One day, under my umbrella, I overheard 2 people muttering, "Why won't this rain stop? It's been too long." I looked up. They were right. The rain had been falling for a very long time.